first things first is for those who do not know about you, tell me a bit about your background. Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a, kidney specialist. That's my training. But I became very interested in sort of the question of weight loss because of its link to type 2 diabetes, which causes a lot of kidney disease. So I sort of got very much into it and started looking at the scientific basis of a lot
Mhm.
of the things that were sort of promoted by doctors and for doctors um, on how to lose weight. And unfortunately, a lot of them didn't make a lot of sense. A lot of the stuff that I was talking about, about calories and so on, it just didn't make any physiologic sense. And that's
Yeah,
why I started to write about it. And that's how I thought about intermittent fasting as a method. And at the time I started writing about it, which is 8-9 years ago, it was considered sort of one of these things that was generally accepted as bad. But when you look at the physiology of what happens to the human body, there's really nothing bad about it. If you have excessive stores of food energy, which are calories, so your body can store calories as body fat, for example. So if you have too much, then just let your
mhm.
body use it up. There's really nothing more difficult to understand than that. It's natural. It's literally the reason we carry the body fat. So let your body use it.
Right.
So it was a strategy that really had no reason not to do it. But at the time, of course, people were saying that, oh, if you do it, it's gonna cause muscle loss and it's gonna cause you more weight gain and stuff. But it actually wasn't true. It's a sort of viable strategy for you to use if you are able to. Of course, the main the science behind it had been worked out for years because fasting is actually a very, very old sort of tradition. And there was really nothing harmful about it when you actually look at the science of what happens. So that's where I started saying, hey, this is a reasonable strategy. If it works for you, then use it. So and it's helped a lot of people.
And when and how did you discover fasting?
It was just sort of in the process of, thinking about weight loss and how
Mhm.
the whole calories in, calories out model was very much flawed. And then there's this whole subcurrent about people saying, oh, well, you have to eat enough calories. It's like, okay, well, what do you want? Do you want people to cut calories or lose it? So then I started thinking about fasting. And the thing about fasting is that um, as a physician, I actually tell people to fast all the time, right? If you're going for surgery, you have to fast. After surgery, you have to fast. If you go for colonoscopy, you have to fast. If you do fasting blood work, you have to fast. So, in fact, I had been telling people to do it for decades. Um, and then, even myself, when I was going through training, and most doctors will understand that, hey, sometimes you just get so busy, you don't wind up eating for a day sort of thing, right? As you get swamped and the
Right.
ER or whatever it is, right? Um, so then I thought, well, there's nothing actually wrong with this, but yeah, everybody says it's all wrong. So then that's where I started to really think about it. But it was just in the process of thinking about this question of how to get people to lose weight.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely. So now we'll go ahead and get into some of the primer questions and we'll just roll through them.
Okay.
Well, first off, with what is fasting for those who don't know, and then going into who do you recommend fasting, who do you not, and why?
Fasting is really just any time that you're not eating. So your body sort of really exists in one of two states when you look at it from a food perspective. You're either feeding, which is eating, so you're taking in food energy, which is calories, and therefore you're going to store some of that away. Just like when you go to the grocery store, you're going to buy a bit more than you need and put it in the fridge. That's what your
Right.
body does. When you're eating, you're going to use some of it, but you're going to put the rest into storage. And body fat is a form of storage. Sugar is also a form of storage. So you can store that in the liver or blood glucose, which is the link with type 2 diabetes, of course. So you're either sort of feeding, which is storing those calories, or you're fasting, which is you're not eating. So your body is going to need to use those calories, right? So you're going to take it back out of storage. Just like if you don't go to the grocery store, you take that food back out of the fridge and you have stuff to eat because you have stored it away, right? Same thing with
Right.
your body. Body has stored away those calories and now you're fasting, you're using those calories. So you're either storing those calories or you're using those calories. And there's nothing wrong with using the calories as long as you have enough stored away. I mean, that's literally why you have body fat. Is why you don't die in your sleep every single night, because you have the ability to store those calories. And
Right.
if you simply, if you want to, if you have too many of those calories stored away as body fat, for example, then you can simply extend the time that your body is fasting, because you're either sort of storing it or burning it, and now you want to burn it. So you need to give the body the time it takes. What happens to the body when that happens? Well, nothing bad. All you're doing is you're taking the calories that are stored, you're burning them. That's
You're right.
nothing else. I mean, that it's a process that the human body has figured out over millions of years to be able to do that and still be very, very healthy. So that's really the entire process of fasting. And
Yeah.
there's really nothing more complicated to it than that, which is just, if you want more time, give it more time. So you can do
Yeah.
12 hours, you can do 16 hours, you could do 24 hours, you could do 36 hours, you could do 36 days if you wanted to, right? If you think about how many calories you need, your body is burning, suppose your body's burning 1800 calories, right? And that's sort of an average.
Right.
A pound of body fat is roughly 3500 calories. So you're talking about pound of body fat is enough to sustain you for sort of 2 full days of fasting. That's just the mathematics of it. So if you want to lose 10 pounds, you could easily fast for 20 days to use it up, right? That's just the math of it. And behaviorally, it's a totally different story, right? There's
Right. Exactly. And I do appreciate that you mentioned that it's more about the time and not the diet when it comes to fasting, and actually making the distinction that it's centered around time and not necessarily what you eat. Because a lot of people that I talk to, they say, "Well, what do you eat? Do you eat like this or do you eat like that?" And I have to tell them that's exactly the total opposite of what people call a diet. It's
Yeah,
not.
it's actually completely independent of diet. So when you're thinking about diet, those are the foods that you eat when you eat.
Mhm.
Fasting is the amount of time that you spend not eating. So it actually has nothing to do with your diet. You could be paleo, you could do keto, you could do vegetarian, you could do whatever you want. It actually has no impact on the foods that you choose to eat. And that's why it's so powerful, because it can really work with any type of diet. And in fact, in cultures all over the world, despite very different food sources, they still many of them still embrace fasting. But there's two sort of questions, right? It's the sort of what you eat, which is your diet, right? What and how much you eat is part of your diet. But the fasting is really answering the question of when you eat and how often you eat, which is a totally separate question. So if you only, so most of us, when you talk about weight loss, only think about the diet, but you're missing half the story. You're missing the question of when and how often you eat, right? So you're sort of
Yeah.
missing half of the equation, which is why diets can be very unsuccessful, because you've only sort of answered that first part and not the full sort of picture, right? Your day is divided into the part that you're feeding and the part where you're fasting. But if you only concentrate on the food, well, and you're eating it constantly and too much of it, well, that's not going to cause weight loss either.
Who do you recommend fasting? Who do you not? Uh, and why?
Yeah, really, fasting is something that everybody should be doing. I mean, that's where the word breakfast comes in, the meal that breaks your fast. Well, you can't break a fast if you're not fasting. So everybody's supposed to be fasting, right? So it's just a question of how long. So if you say don't eat after, dinner at say 7 o'clock, and you eat breakfast at like 7 or 8 o'clock, you're talking 12 to 13 hours of fasting is sort of a standard that most people should be doing almost every single day. When you're talking about intermittent fasting for weight loss, most people are talking about going past that 12, 13, 14-hour stage that everybody sort of normally gets. So most people are talking about 16 hours. When you get to there, people start to worry about, are you getting enough nutrition, which is a valid concern. So people who are, children who are growing, pregnancy, breastfeeding, are things they have to be cautious of. If you're taking medication specifically for type 2 diabetes, because they can push your blood sugars low and they're prescribed based on your diet, if you change that diet or if you change your fasting regimen, then you should talk to your doctor about that. But for everybody else, it's just part of the normal human experience.
I appreciate that you mentioned that because I hear a lot of people talk about, well, it's not good for everyone, is it? Well, after you wake up, like you mentioned, they call it breakfast, break fast. So
Yeah.
everyone does it. But a lot of people just don't realize it. And I have to clarify that with some of my friends to get the point across.
Yeah, the point is that if you say, you shouldn't fast, that means you should always be eating sort of constantly from the minute you get up to the moment you go to bed. That is for the 16 hours or so that you are awake. You should be constantly putting food in your mouth. It's like, one, that's not the way humans used to do it, right? 3 meals a day, that was it. So there was a built-in fasting period. If you say that you shouldn't fast, then what you're saying, without them realizing it, is that you should be feeding all the time. Well, that's just not that good for you. If you want to lose weight, it's actually quite bad.
Right. So, what would you say are the benefits of fasting, short term versus long term?
There's actually a huge number of benefits, which is that one, it's a way to sort of lose weight. It gets your blood sugars down. So if you're type 2 diabetic, it can be much better. If so, those are the two main advantages, and then you get the health benefits of that. So because your body stores energy as sugar, if your sugars are high, like type 2 diabetes, it will come down. If your body also stores energy as body fat, so if you have too much body fat, then it will use it, so it will come down. So then you have all those benefits from sort of losing weight and getting rid of type 2 diabetes, which is a lower risk of heart disease and cancers and strokes and infections and, blindness and kidney disease and so on, like a huge range of health benefits from that. From a more sort of short-term benefit, what you get is you tend to see that people have more energy than before. They tend to feel lighter, so because when you're eating, your body tends to hold water, so you can feel a little bit bloated. So as get rid of some of that water, people feel lighter. You tend to get more energy because as your body is fasting, people think they have no energy, but what happens is that you're simply taking that energy from its stores. When you look at what happens to the human body, the body actually increases certain hormones when you are not eating, which is, one of them is growth hormone and one of them is noradrenaline. So your body is actually activating itself. It's not shutting down. So when you don't eat, when you fast, your body is not shutting down. It's actually ramping itself up, which is why, you compare a lion who just ate is just sort of lethargic, or you can compare humans after like a huge meal like Thanksgiving. They're just a little bit lethargic, right? Compared to when you're hungry. So the hungry wolf is very activated, right? It's very focused. So you have more concentration, you have more energy, and metabolic rate tends to stay more uh, preserved. So when you try to lose weight, a lot of the problems that people see is that the amount of energy that they're burning, the calories that they're using in a day tends to go down, which is their metabolic rate, which has nothing to do with exercise. It's the energy that you use generating body heat, and your heart and your lungs and your kidneys all need energy. Well, most people, when they lose weight, the amount of calories they burn goes down. But with fasting, because it's sort of ramping itself up, that is, it's increasing the sympathetic tone and increasing noradrenaline, tends to go up. Growth hormone also tends to go up. So when you do eat again, your body is going to naturally sort of repair itself. So therefore, muscle mass tends to be better preserved with that. And also the, in terms of hunger, people worry a lot about hunger, which is a legitimate concern. But over time, hunger tends to decrease during fasting because the body learns that it can feed itself through its sort of own body fat. So you just don't get hungry. So, for example, people who skip breakfast routinely, well, they just don't get hungry at breakfast because they're habituated. They don't expect to eat. So therefore they don't get hungry. Well, if you're not hungry, that's a huge advantage when you're trying to lose weight. right? It's the problem is that people get too hungry and therefore they find themselves eating more. So if you can do something like fasting, which is training your body to only expect food once or twice a day, well, once you establish that habit, that's a huge advantage because you're simply, you're working with your body instead of fighting, your body, which is what a lot of these calorie restricted diets do. They constantly feed you. So therefore, like if you think about the old strategies, which is what a lot of people used to talk about, low fat meals, and eating sort of 6 to 8 times a day. Well, what does that do? If you're eating 6 times a day, what happens? Well, you take a little bit of food, you stimulate your appetite, right? Because you see the food, you're salivating, you're getting
Oh
food
yeah,
in, and then
absolutely.
you try and stop. Yeah, and then you have to stop yourself before you get full. Well, that's what an appetizer does, right? If you think about what an appetizer is, it's a small portion of food that makes you more hungry, not less hungry. So if you're taking sort of, little appetizers throughout the day, you're actually stimulating your hunger through the day, but then not feeding that hunger. Well, that's a terrible way to go, right? It's like you're making life so much more difficult for yourself. You're stimulating hunger and then deliberately not feeding that hunger, as opposed to training your body to be less hungry because you're simply not expecting it. Like it makes no sense. The sort of old strategy of eating constantly. It really was bad from a physiology standpoint, but also bad from a behavioral standpoint.
So, what is a typical process that you go through with your customers to take care of them on their fasting journey?
So at thefastingmethod.com, what we do is basically try to look at three major things. One is to make sure that they have the knowledge that they need. So,
Mhm.
there's a lot of sort of knowledge out there. There's lots of videos, there's lots of stuff you can look at online. But changing behavior is more than just about the knowledge, right? You also have to look at the environments that make you successful and then the emotions. So if you look at the environments, for example, what you can do is if you put yourself in an environment where you're going to fail, you're going to fail. So for example, if you're in an office meeting and somebody orders a big plate of cookies, well, you might not be hungry. You wouldn't have normally eaten because it's not a meal time, but you're bored and the cookies are sitting in front of you. So you eat it, right? So that's an example of an environment that's going to be very detrimental to your sort of fasting. Same
Right.
thing with, and this happens a lot. Like if somebody wants to fast, but their friends are not fasting, or the person who cooks the meals, there are lots of different ways that you can get tripped up. And that's one of the things that we try and go through. And at thefastingmethod.com, we have sort of like classes to talk about it, and we have coaching so that people can really zero in on like where the problem is, because it's not necessarily that you don't know that you should be fasting. That's only the very sort of beginning level. It's like, why can't you? And it's not because of willpower for the most part. It's about the lifestyles, the habits, creating habits. Like, what are your bad habits? Like, for example, you have to look at what the triggers are.
Mhm.
So, for example, if you sit in front of the TV and and you're just accustomed to snacking, well, that's your cue, right? So you have to recognize that this is not that you didn't know you shouldn't fast, is that you're triggered because of the TV. So now you have to try and change that habit. How do you break that habit, and how do you replace it with something that's sort of better for you, right? And those are all part of the environment and the systems that you have, and that's where people in the 70s used to have very good systems, right? There's just no food available. There's no snacks available. And, your mom, if you wanted an after school snack, would say, no, you're going to ruin your dinner. And if you wanted an
Right.
after school snack, she'd say, no, you should have ate more at dinner, right? There's just no food. So therefore, that environment makes it very easy for you to follow that behavior that you want. And that's really important because, everybody thinks that it's about willpower, but it's really not. It's about because in the 70s, humans didn't have more or less willpower than humans in 2020, but that the amount of obesity is much higher. And it's because the environment that we're on really promotes this idea of constant snacking. You go to the coffee shop and hey, there's muffins or donuts or something as well, right? So all of
Right
a
in your
sudden,
face.
Yeah, right in your face, and that's an environmental issue. Well, how do you get around that? Maybe you go get yourself a machine to make your own coffee, or maybe you order ahead on a mobile app, for example, so you only get your coffee. You're not faced with the actual smells and sights of that donut. You're just like, I'm
Right.
getting my coffee, I'm ordering it online, I'm going to pick it up. Now you've taken away that temptation, but it's not about the knowledge, it's about your systems, it's about your environments. And then the third thing that we really look at very closely is the emotions, because again, some people eat for different reasons. So some people eat because they're sad or depressed. I mean, a lot of the comfort foods that we talk about sort of light up the reward system. So if you're a little sad, you might go and eat. People who have a breakup, they go eat a tub of ice cream, right? Everybody knows it's bad for you, but the point is that you're not eating because of you didn't know or your system. It's because is that emotional state. So how are you going to fix that? And that's where talking to people, other things like meditation and yoga and dealing with chronic stresses, those are important. And those are the things that the coaches can really help sort of zero in on, because I think it's a lot of these other issues, particularly the environments, that make it easy for us. If you think back years ago, there was a lot less sort of fast food and stuff, so it's not in your face all the time, and therefore it's a lot easier to not eat. So that's the sort of where we take things, really trying to look at the entire sort of package, other than the knowledge. I mean, knowledge, everybody thinks it's about the knowledge. So you buy a diet book and you're going to do better. But it's like, it's crazy, because the knowledge is the easiest thing to get. It's like, if I tell you, you should not eat cookies. Now that's good advice. Everybody knows that that's good advice. Well, it doesn't mean I'm not going to eat a cookie. it's That's far from it. I mean,
Yeah,
so it's not the knowledge, it's those other issues that you really have to zoom in on to help people.
that's absolutely true. Because I know when I first started fasting, that was a challenge. But I know we just have a few minutes left here. So I want to get into at least one more question. So we'll make this quick. What are misconceptions that you hear about fasting? And what do you say to address them?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is that it causes muscle loss. And, again, it's basically a misconception. Your body either builds muscle or loses muscle, not depending on what you eat generally. It mostly depends on how much exercise you do. Like, I'd love it if I could just eat and build muscle, but it doesn't happen. You need to exercise, you need to lift weights. You lift heavy weights, your body gets stronger. It doesn't get stronger because you eat more. So, that link is just not there. It'd be great if it was, but it wasn't. The other thing is that it causes your body to shut down or go into starvation mode, which is, again, as we've talked about, sort of a misconception. Your body actually ramps up, doesn't ramp down. Third is that it's just a fad diet. It's like, well, it's mentioned in the Bible. It's practically in every major religion in the world. So if it's a fad, it's a very, very old fad, like,
All right.
going back a couple of thousand years. So no, it's not a fad diet. It's actually just part of the way that humans sort of live. And those are sort of the biggest misconceptions. There's a whole lot others. I try to, go over a lot of them in the YouTube videos that I post up. But yeah, there's a lot of them.
And finally, I want to get into what resources you'd recommend for someone who wants to learn more about fasting.
So there's a few. I've put up a lot of YouTube videos. So those are all great because they're all like free, and there's a lot of them. They all answer different questions. So check those out. You can also go to the website, thefastingmethod.com. I have had a blog that I wrote a lot of materials on. You can also check out my books, The Obesity Code, The Diabetes Code, which cover those, and The Complete Guide to Fasting. So those are all good references to go to.
I wanted to definitely thank you for your time. And I will definitely be emailing you when I get the news article out. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. I'll talk with you soon.
All right, thank you. Okay,
Bye.
bye.